So another Souls marathon is done. We have completed every single game using the Claymore this time, and the Claymore is an amazing weapon in every single game. Every single Claymore is just good. Doesn't do anything too special or flashy, it's just really solid. Every single time that I picked up the Claymore, I just had the exact same reaction. Like, this thing is just neat. It just works. But to get started off with the least best Claymore, because there's no such thing as a worst Claymore, no such thing as a bad Claymore, it just does not exist. It's like saying what's the worst Kung Fu Panda movie? It doesn't exist. Every single one is amazing. Just like the Claymore, but unfortunately, the least best Claymore would have to go to Demon Souls, which definitely hurts me to say because this one looks the best. This one has the coolest design. Look at that Claymore design. It's just classic. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. I want a sword just like this in real life. It just looks so cool. But this Claymore actually does get a pretty good moveset. The light attacks are all nice and fluid and smooth. Going into the heavy attacks as well, all pretty good. But every single large sword in Demon Souls basically gets the exact same moveset. So that means that the Claymore doesn't actually get a poking attack. How are you a Claymore without a poking attack? That's like illegal. It's like finding out that Miyazaki's first game didn't have any bare feet. Like, every single Miyazaki game has to have bare feet. Just like every single Claymore has to have a poking attack. Now, it's like the weapon is bad at all. Obviously, it's still going to be amazing, but it still would have benefited greatly if the heavy attack was a poke. And it's like it's the best large sword in the game, but it still is a very solid option. Now, next up, we have the Dark Souls 2 Claymore. Honestly, I don't want this one to be lower on the list as well, because I just love the combos of this Claymore. The light attack into the heavy attack is so nice. The heavy attack into the follow-up heavy is also really quick, covers so much range. I just spam the heavy attack so much. They're so fun to use in Dark Souls 2. But unfortunately, there are going to be some downsides. One, the heavy attack does consume a lot of stamina. Two, there's actually like no vertical swipes with a light attack combo, which is like not too big of a deal because I don't really like the vertical swipes that some of the greatswords do get because they tend to be pretty slow. But when you're fighting some smaller enemies like rats or crystal lizards, and you can't hit them, it gets to be pretty annoying. And compared to some of the other greatswords in the game, it's obviously not going to be as good. It tends to fall off later in the playthrough because the scalings are pretty poor. But honestly, the main reason as to why it's going to get lower on the list is because look at this thing. It looks silly. This is not a Claymore. The Claymore is not supposed to look like this. Where's the cool little rings? This looks like the most generic sword. Why is he holding the pommel of the weapon? This is egregious. This is not a Claymore. Number 3, we have the Dark Souls 3 Claymore. Another one that's just amazing, and there's honestly nothing bad that I can really say about it. The greatswords in Dark Souls 3 have very quick recovery animations, very good variety of moveset with the vertical swipes two-handed and the horizontal swipes one-handed. Obviously retains that classic heavy attack poke. Now, unfortunately, unlike the Dark Souls 2 follow-up heavy attack, this one kind of sucks. The follow-up heavy in Dark Souls 2 was amazing. This one is not good. But thankfully, at least this one actually looks like a regular Claymore. Actually does get some pretty decent scalings to where it's the best greatsword out of all the ones that can be infused. And obviously, Dark Souls 3 did introduce weapon arts, so you actually do get a cool skill. This one being stance, which is amazing. Ends PvE, ends PvP, because it's good at roll catching, does some okay damage, and the light attack version is good at guard breaking. Now, using these things in terms of damage is never going to be that good. Like a regular charged heavy attack just does more damage than the weapon art R2. But having stance with the greatsword is just really cool, and I wish that stance or square off was on greatswords in Elden Ring, but that's fine. Now, funnily enough, the Dark Souls 3 Claymore is the only one that actually scales better off dexterity. Just having a sharp infusion is just always going to be better because it actually does still retain a strength scaling, where having a heavy infusion actually removes the dexterity scaling completely. And even when you have it refined infused with a quality build, it doesn't really outperform it until you get to like 40-40, which is pretty funny because almost every single Claymore is just best with a quality build or a strength build. But typical Dark Souls 3 with how good sharp infusions are, dexterity is the play. But the main reason why it's not going to get that high on the list is because it's definitely not the best greatsword in Dark Souls 3. There's so many just like amazing heavy hitters in the greatsword category. And the Hollow Slayer greatsword is just arguably a better version of the Claymore because that one also does get a poking attack with a heavy. Normally the Claymores just reign supreme as like the only greatsword that actually gets a poking attack, but the Hollow Slayer greatsword actually does get one, and it arguably gets the better light attack combo as well. But obviously the Claymore is still amazing and it can carry you from start to finish very easily. Number 2, we have the Elden Ring Claymore. Now this is probably the most powerful iteration of the Claymore. That's probably because obviously things like Ashes of War exist and how many buffs are in Elden Ring that you can like continuously stack, like Golden Bow, Flame Gummy Strength, all the Wondrous Flasks. You can just get some like ridiculous and stupid damage out of this. But the best thing about the Claymore is obviously once again going to be its poking heavy attack. It's the only greatsword that actually does get it. And it also does get a poking attack when you do the crouch and the roll as well, which obviously makes it amazing for PvP. But the reason why poking attacks are just amazing to have, especially with the heavy, is because piercing damage exists. And piercing damage is like arguably like the best damage type in this game. A lot of enemies are very weak to it, and obviously counter damage exists. And pairing it alongside things like the Spear Talisman can just make it do even more damage. Have the Axe Talisman, Spiked Cracked here, and as you can see with the gameplay, things are just getting absolutely decimated, like this destroyed. But the main reason as to why it's not going to get number 1 is because The Claymore is a good weapon, but it's not going to be like a top 10 or like a top 20 weapon in this game. It's probably not even like the top 3 or top 5 in the greatsword category itself. But compared to like a lot of the other weapons that can be infused for a heavy based option, this one is actually really good. And at number 1 for the best Claymore, we have the Dark Souls 1 Claymore. Probably to nobody's surprise, because this one is just arguably one of the best weapons in the entire game. Easily a top 5 Dark Souls 1 weapon. It's just probably the best greatsword in terms of just like raw damage, unless you're comparing it to like the Black Knight Sword. But when you're using buffs, which you can pair alongside the Claymore, it's just probably going to be even better. The greatsword movesets are just really solid. You get good variety with horizontal swipes, vertical swipes, and obviously the Claymore gets the poke, the classic poke, and it's just absolutely amazing in this game, and it's really good with like every single infusion. And out of all the Claymores that you do acquire, this one is probably the most memorable as well. From the good old dragon on the bridge, the classic that's in every single game, you can't go wrong with the dragon on the bridge aesthetic. And putting the Claymore in that position just made it even more of a classic weapon. Anyway, that is that. It is now done. Definitely let me know what your opinions are down in the comments, and also let me know what type of Souls marathon you'd like for me to do next. And definitely do check me out on Twitch, because I actually am live there every single day. And yeah, see you guys in the next one. Bye.